The moving truck rumbled down Maple Avenue on a bright Saturday morning, drawing curious glances from behind curtained windows. Anthony and Zara Wilson had finally found their dream home in Oakwood Heights, a neighborhood known for its tree-lined streets and well-maintained houses with spacious yards. After years of saving and countless home tours, they were ready to put down roots in a community where they could build a future. Anthony pulled their SUV into the driveway behind the moving truck, reaching over to squeeze Zara's hand. "We made it," he said with a wide smile that brought out the laugh lines around his eyes. At 34, Anthony had recently been promoted to senior developer at a tech company downtown, a position that had made this move possible. "I still can't believe this is ours," Zara replied, gazing at the two-story colonial with its fresh white paint and navy blue shutters. Her dark curls were pulled back in a practical ponytail for moving day, but nothing could contain her excitement. She had been working remotely for the past 2 years, and the thought of finally having a dedicated home office space made her practically giddy. As they stepped out of the car, a middle-aged couple from across the street approached with a homemade pie. "Welcome to the neighborhood." The woman introduced herself as Diane, and her husband as Rick. "We thought you might want something sweet after a long day of unpacking." Anthony thanked them warmly, and they chatted briefly about the neighborhood, local restaurants, and the farmers market that happened every Sunday just a few blocks away. Other neighbors stopped by throughout the day, a young couple with twin toddlers, an elderly man walking his golden retriever, and a single mom who lived 2 doors down. Each greeting was friendly, each smile genuine. Zara felt a growing sense that they had chosen well, all except for house number 47. From behind her pristine white curtains, Judith Blackwell watched the scene unfold with narrowed eyes and a deepening frown. At 62, Judith had lived in Oakwood Heights for over 3 decades. She had served on the Neighborhood Association Board, organized the annual block party, and prided herself on knowing everything that happened on Maple Avenue. Another one of those couples, she muttered to herself, watching as Anthony and Zara unloaded boxes from the truck. There goes the neighborhood. Judith had fought hard against the changing demographics of Oakwood Heights. When the Patels moved in 5 years ago, she had complained about cooking smells. When the Morales family bought the corner lot, she circulated a petition about noise concerns. But the neighborhood had continued to change despite her efforts, and it filled her with a simmering resentment that she nursed like a precious flame. The following morning, Zara was arranging books on their new built-in shelves when she noticed Judith standing at the edge of their property, seemingly inspecting their lawn. Wanting to start off on the right foot with all their neighbors, Zara stepped outside. "Good morning. I'm Zara Wilson. My husband and I just moved in yesterday," she said, extending her hand with a friendly smile. Judith looked at the offered hand for a moment too long before briefly taking it. "Judith Blackwell. I've been here since 1990. It's lovely to meet you. Ms. Blackwell, we're so excited to be part of this community." Judith replied, her gaze drifting to the colorful garden flag Zara had planted by the mailbox. "You should know that this neighborhood has standards. The association has rules about lawn ornaments and such." Zara's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, I didn't realize. We'll be sure to review the guidelines." "See that you do," Judith said curtly before adding, "The trash pickup is on Thursdays. Don't put your bins out before Wednesday evening." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked back toward her immaculately maintained colonial with its precisely trimmed hedges and weedless flower beds. As the week progressed, Anthony and Zara settled into their new home and routine. Anthony commuted to the office 3 days a week while Zara set up her home workspace with a view of their backyard. They met more neighbors, found their favorite local coffee shop, and began to feel like they belonged, except for the uncomfortable awareness of being watched. Whenever they stepped outside, Judith seemed to appear, watering plants that had already been watered, collecting mail that had been delivered hours ago, or simply sitting on her porch with an unreadable expression. If they waved, she would give a tight nod in return, never a smile. "Maybe she's just shy," Anthony suggested one evening as they grilled dinner on their new patio. "I don't think that's it," Zara replied, lowering her voice despite the distance between houses. "Have you noticed she only acts this way with us? I saw her chatting and laughing with the Hendersons for nearly half an hour yesterday." Anthony flipped a burger, his brow furrowing. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt for now. She's lived here a long time, maybe she just doesn't like change. Zara nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than that. The first real incident happened 10 days after they moved in. Anthony had mowed the lawn that morning, and a small pile of grass clippings had been left near the curb waiting to be bagged. Judith marched across the street, camera phone in hand, and began taking pictures of the grass pile. "Excuse me," Zara called from the front door. "Is there a problem?" "This is a violation of neighborhood codes," Judith replied, still photographing. "Section 12, paragraph 3 clearly states that lawn waste must be properly disposed of immediately." "We're in the middle of yard work," Anthony explained, coming around from the backyard with a rake in hand. "I'm about to bag it up right now." "The rules apply to everyone," Judith said coldly. "I've documented the violation and will be submitting it to the association board." As she walked away, Anthony and Zara exchanged bewildered looks. "Is she for real?" Anthony whispered. "Unfortunately, I think she is," Zara replied. The following day, Zara was working in her home office when she noticed Judith speaking with another older woman on the sidewalk in front of their house. Their conversation was animated, with frequent glances toward the Wilsons' property. Curious, Zara opened her window slightly. "Property values are my concern," Judith was saying. "You know how these things go. First one family moves in, then another, and before you know it, the whole character of the neighborhood changes." "They seem like a lovely couple, Judith," the other woman replied. "He's some kind of computer engineer and she works from home. Very quiet neighbors." "That's how it starts," Judith insisted. "Just wait until they have friends over. You know how they are. Loud music, cars parked everywhere." Zara quietly closed the window, her hands trembling slightly. There was no mistaking the implication in Judith's words. The thinly veiled prejudice that lurked beneath her concerns about property values and neighborhood character. That evening, Zara told Anthony about what she'd overheard. His jaw tightened as she spoke, the muscle in his cheek twitching with suppressed anger. "I was hoping we were wrong about her," he said finally. "I thought maybe she was just particular about the neighborhood rules." "I don't think it's the rules she cares about," Zara replied softly. "It's who she thinks should be following them." They discussed their options, from confronting Judith directly to reporting her behavior to the neighborhood association. In the end, they decided to continue being model neighbors while keeping their distance from house number 47. "We won't give her any ammunition," Anthony declared, "and maybe, just maybe, she'll eventually see us as people, not stereotypes." The next weekend, they invited a few friends over for dinner to celebrate their new home. The gathering was small, just 3 couples, all colleagues of Anthony's. They ate on the patio, sharing stories and laughter as the evening air cooled around them. From time to time, Zara would catch a glimpse of movement behind Judith's curtains, but she refused to let it dampen the evening. As their friends were leaving, just after 9, Judith emerged from her house and stood watching from her front yard, arms crossed over her chest, her disapproval radiating across the street. "Is that the neighbor you mentioned?" whispered Tanya, one of the dinner guests. Zara nodded. "That's our welcoming committee. Stay strong," Tanya said, hugging her goodbye. "Every neighborhood has one. Eventually they either come around or become irrelevant." Zara hoped her friend was right. She and Anthony were here to stay, to build a life in this house they had fallen in love with. One disapproving neighbor, even one with apparent influence in the community, wouldn't drive them away. What they didn't know was that Judith Blackwell was already planning her next move, one that would escalate their quiet neighborhood tension into a public confrontation none of them would soon forget. 3 weeks had passed since Anthony and Zara moved into their new home on Maple Avenue, and despite Judith's ongoing surveillance, they were settling into a comfortable routine. They had repainted the kitchen a cheerful yellow, planted flowers along the walkway, and finally unpacked the last of their boxes. The house was beginning to feel like home. "What do you think about having a proper housewarming?" Anthony suggested one evening as they sat on their porch swing, watching fireflies dance in the growing twilight. "Nothing fancy, just a small barbecue with some friends and maybe a few neighbors?" Zara took a sip from her lemonade, considering. "I'd like that. Do you think we should invite Judith?" She glanced toward house number 47, where lights glowed behind drawn curtains. Anthony followed her gaze and sighed. The neighborly thing would be to invite her. Whether she comes or not is up to her. The following Saturday arrived with perfect barbecue weather, sunshine, a gentle breeze, and clear blue skies. Anthony fired up the grill around 4 o'clock while Zara arranged platters of sliced watermelon, corn on the cob, and her mother's famous potato salad on the patio table. Should I put out the lawn games now or wait until people arrive? Anthony called from the garage where he was rummaging through boxes. Might as well set them up now, Zara replied. The Patels said they're bringing their kids and you know how much Diane loves cornhole. By 5 o'clock, their backyard was filled with the happy sounds of conversation and laughter. Rick and Diane had brought homemade strawberry shortcake. The Patels arrived with their twin 8-year-olds and a platter of samosas that disappeared within minutes. 3 of Anthony's co-workers came with their partners, and the young couple with the toddlers from down the street stopped by with a bottle of wine. Zara had dropped off an invitation at Judith's door 3 days earlier, but wasn't surprised when the older woman didn't show up. Still, she caught glimpses of curtains moving at Judith's upstairs window throughout the evening. "Don't let her spoil our fun," Anthony whispered, handing Zara a plate piled high with barbecue chicken and grilled vegetables. "I'm not," Zara assured him, though she couldn't help glancing toward house number 47 every now and then. As the sun began to set, Anthony connected his phone to a small Bluetooth speaker and put on a playlist of laid-back summer tunes. The volume was modest, just loud enough for those in the backyard to enjoy, but not so loud it would disturb the neighborhood. A few couples danced on the patio while others chatted in lawn chairs or played games on the grass. "This was such a good idea," Zara said, leaning against Anthony's shoulder as they watched their friends enjoying themselves. "I feel like we're really making this place our own now." Around 7:30, as the sky turned to shades of pink and orange, Diane approached them with a worried expression. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think you should know that Judith is on her phone and she looks angry." Anthony frowned. "We're not being too loud, are we?" "The music's pretty low." "You're fine," Diane assured them. "Judith complains about everything. Last year she called noise control on the neighborhood block party, an event she helped organize until she decided the wrong element was taking over." Zara and Anthony exchanged a look, both understanding exactly what Diane meant. True to her reputation, at exactly 7:42 p.m., Zara noted the time on her watch. A police cruiser pulled up in front of their house. The conversation in the backyard quieted as Officer Chen, a young Asian-American policeman, made his way through the side gate that Anthony had left open for guests. "Good evening," he said, his expression professional but not unfriendly. "We received a complaint about a disturbance at this address." Anthony stepped forward, extending his hand. "Officer, I'm Anthony Wilson. This is my wife Zara. We're having a small housewarming barbecue with our neighbors and friends. Is there a problem?" Officer Chen shook Anthony's hand, glancing around at the gathering. Someone reported loud music and suspicious activity. They mentioned possible drug use. A shocked murmur went through the group. Zara felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. "That's absolutely not true," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "As you can see, this is just a friendly neighborhood gathering. We have children here." The officer nodded, clearly assessing the situation. The music was playing softly in the background. People were eating barbecue and cake. The Patel's children were playing a beanbag toss game with one of the toddlers from down the street. "Mind if I turn this up a bit?" Officer Chen asked, gesturing to the speaker. When Anthony nodded, he increased the volume to what would be considered moderately loud. Then he walked to the edge of the property, standing where the lawn met the sidewalk. "I can barely hear it from here," he noted, turning the volume back down. "We've been careful about the noise level," Zara explained. "We sent invitations to all the immediate neighbors, including the person who I suspect made this call." Officer Chen's expression suggested he had a good idea who had made the complaint. "Look, I need to follow up on all calls, but there's clearly no violation here. Keep the music at a reasonable level. Wrap things up at a decent hour and you'll be fine." He paused, then added more quietly, "Between us, some people make these calls hoping for a different response from officers. I'm sorry you had to deal with this during your housewarming." After the officer left, Zara noticed Judith standing on her front porch, arms crossed, watching with evident disappointment as the police cruiser drove away without incident. "Don't let her win," Diane said, coming up beside Zara. That's what she wants, for you to feel unwelcome here. The party continued, though with a subdued quality that hadn't been there before. Friends and neighbors made a point of telling Anthony and Zara how much they were enjoying themselves, how wonderful the food was, and how happy they were to have the couple in the neighborhood. It was touching, but couldn't completely erase the sting of having police called to their home. By 9 o'clock, most guests had left, with final hugs and promises to get together soon. Anthony and Zara cleaned up the backyard in relative silence, both processing what had happened. I can't believe she called the police, Zara said finally, tying off a garbage bag. What did she think would happen? That they'd shut down our barbecue? Arrest us for grilling chicken? Anthony shook his head, his expression grim. She wanted to send a message, to show us that she has power, that she can disrupt our lives if she wants to. Well, message received, Zara replied bitterly. But if she thinks this will make us leave, she's sorely mistaken. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Anthony turned to Zara. I think I need to talk to her, he said quietly. To Judith? Do you think that's wise? Probably not, he admitted. But I can't just pretend this didn't happen. I need to look her in the eye and ask her why she did this. Maybe if we talk face to face, person to person, she'll see that her actions have real consequences for real people. Zara wasn't convinced but understood her husband's need to address the situation directly. Just promise me you'll keep your cool. That's exactly what she wants, to provoke you into saying or doing something she can use against us. I promise, Anthony said, squeezing her hand in the darkness. I'll be the model of restraint. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Anthony waited until he saw Judith collecting her Sunday newspaper from her driveway before heading outside, ostensibly to check their own mailbox. Good morning. Miss Blackwell, he called, his voice pleasant but firm. Do you have a moment to talk? Judith clutched her newspaper to her chest like a shield. I'm quite busy today, she replied, already turning back toward her house. It won't take long, Anthony persisted, crossing the street but stopping at the edge of her property, respectful of boundaries despite his simmering frustration. I'd like to know why you called the police on our gathering last night. Judith's face tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Please, Anthony said, fighting to keep his voice level. We both know it was you. What I don't understand is why. We weren't being loud. We weren't causing any problems. We even invited you to join us. This is harassment, Judith declared, her voice rising slightly. I'll call the police again if you don't leave my property immediately. I'm not on your property, Anthony pointed out quietly. And I'm just trying to have a civil conversation with my neighbor. Is that too much to ask? Several people had emerged from nearby houses, drawn by the sound of their voices. Zara appeared on their front porch, watching anxiously from across the street. You people always think the rules don't apply to you, Judith said, her eyes narrowing. This is a quiet, respectable neighborhood. If you can't abide by our standards, perhaps you should consider living somewhere else. You people, Anthony repeated, his careful composure beginning to crack. And what exactly do you mean by that, Miss Blackwell? The confrontation was escalating exactly as Zara had feared. She hurried across the street, reaching Anthony's side just as several other neighbors converged on the scene. The morning sun beat down on the gathering crowd as Zara reached Anthony's side. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched at his sides, but his voice remained steady. Judith stood on her immaculate lawn, newspaper still clutched to her chest, her face flushed with what appeared to be both anger and something else, perhaps the uncomfortable sensation of having her actions exposed to public scrutiny. I simply meant people who don't respect the established norms of this neighborhood, Judith said, raising her chin defensively. Really, Anthony replied. Because it seems like you've had a problem with us from the moment we arrived. Before you knew anything about us, our jobs, our habits, our character, you decided we didn't belong here. Diane and Rick had emerged from their house across the street and were making their way over. The Patels stood at the edge of their own property, watching with concerned expressions. Even the elderly man with the golden retriever had paused his morning walk to observe the unfolding drama. That's not true, Judith protested, though her voice lacked conviction. I've lived in this neighborhood for 32 years. I've earned the right to have concerns about who moves in. Zara stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Anthony's arm. Ms. Blackwell, all we wanted was to be good neighbors. We followed the association rules. We kept our property well maintained. We even invited you to our gathering. Yet you called the police and made false accusations about drug use. Why would you do that if not because of prejudice? She'd almost said racism, but had chosen her words carefully, giving Judith a chance to reflect rather than immediately becoming defensive. I heard loud music, Judith insisted, and there were cars parked all over the street. The officer could barely hear our music from the sidewalk, Anthony pointed out. And everyone parked legally. You know that's not why you called. Diane spoke up from behind them. Judith, this isn't the first time you've done something like this. You did the same thing when the Patels moved in, and when the Morales family bought the corner house. That was different, Judith snapped. Was it? Rick asked, his normally jovial face serious. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a pattern. More neighbors had gathered now, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Zara noticed several of them nodding in agreement with Rick's assessment. This is ridiculous, Judith said, her voice rising. I'm being attacked for trying to maintain the standards of this neighborhood. If certain people can't handle living in a civilized community, that's hardly my fault. A sleek silver car pulled into Judith's driveway, interrupting the tense exchange. A woman in her late 30s stepped out, looking confused at the gathering on her mother's lawn. Mom? She called, hurrying over. What's going on here? Nothing, Melissa, Judith replied quickly. Just a neighborhood disagreement. I was about to go inside. Melissa looked from her mother to Anthony and Zara, then to the assembled neighbors. Mom, what did you do? She asked quietly, a note of dread in her voice. Your mother called the police on our housewarming barbecue last night, Anthony explained, his tone softening slightly at the daughter's appearance. She made false accusations about drug use. Melissa closed her eyes briefly as if in pain. Mom, you promised after the incident with the Lee family that you wouldn't do this again. That was different, Judith repeated stubbornly. They were running a business out of their home. Mrs. Lee was giving piano lessons to 3 children, Melissa corrected her. And you called the zoning board, the police, and the homeowners association. She turned to Anthony and Zara with a look of genuine regret. I'm so sorry. My mother, she has some outdated views that I've been trying to help her work through. Outdated. Judith bristled. There's nothing outdated about wanting to live in a safe, respectable neighborhood. The problem isn't the neighborhood, Mom, Melissa said gently but firmly. The neighborhood is changing, yes, but it's still safe. It's still respectable. The only thing that's changed is who lives here. A murmur of agreement went through the gathered neighbors. Zara noticed that many of them were exchanging knowing looks, as if this confrontation had been a long time coming. I don't have to stand here and be lectured on my own property, Judith declared, turning to go inside. Actually, I think you do, came a new voice. An older black man in his 70s had joined the group, leaning on a handsome walking stick. Zara recognized him as Mr. Washington from 2 streets over, a retired history professor who had lived in Oakwood Heights since before Judith herself had moved in. Vernon, Judith acknowledged stiffly. When you moved here in 1990, Mr. Washington said calmly, there were people who weren't happy about it. Do you remember? Judith said nothing, but her posture had gone rigid. The Crawfords next door to you, they were concerned about having a single woman with a young child in the neighborhood, thought it might bring down property values. Mr. Washington's voice was mild, but his eyes were sharp with memory. And the Bennetts worried that you wouldn't be able to keep up with yard maintenance without a husband. They even circulated a petition. That was different, Judith said for the 3rd time. How? Mr. Washington asked simply. When Judith didn't answer, Melissa stepped into the uncomfortable silence. I think what my mother is trying to say is that she has concerns about rapid changes to the neighborhood she loves. But, she added with a pointed look at Judith, she's expressing those concerns in completely inappropriate ways. Look, Anthony said, his voice calmer now. We're not asking for special treatment. We're just asking to be judged by who we are and how we act, not by what we look like or where we might have come from. Isn't that what everyone wants? Several neighbors nodded or murmured in agreement. Even Judith seemed to have run out of ready objections, though her expression remained closed and defensive. I think we've all said enough for today, Zara suggested, suddenly aware of how this public confrontation must look to the entire neighborhood. Ms. Blackwell, we'd still like to find a way to be good neighbors if you're willing. Our door's open when you're ready to talk. She gently tugged at Anthony's arm and he nodded, understanding her desire to end the public spectacle. As they turned to go, Melissa stepped forward. "Wait," she said. "I'd like to apologize properly for what happened. Would it be all right if I stopped by later today? Maybe we could talk?" "Of course," Zara said, smiling warmly at the daughter who seemed nothing like her mother. As they walked back to their own house, neighbors stopped them to express support or share their own stories about Judith's behavior over the years. It was both comforting and disturbing to realize they weren't being singled out. Judith had apparently been making life difficult for anyone she deemed unsuitable for decades. "I'm sorry I confronted her like that," Anthony said once they were inside. "I know you wanted me to keep my cool, but when she said you people, I just couldn't let it go." "Don't apologize," Zara replied, squeezing his hand. "Sometimes things need to be brought into the open. Maybe this will be a turning point." A few hours later, the doorbell rang. Melissa stood on their porch holding a small potted plant and looking uncomfortable. "Peace offering," she said, holding up the plant. "It's a peace lily," seemed appropriate. Zara invited her in, and they settled in the living room. Anthony brought out a tray with iced tea and some leftover cookies from the barbecue. "First, I want to say how truly sorry I am about what happened," Melissa began. "My mother's behavior was inexcusable. Has she always been this way?" Zara asked gently. Melissa sighed, turning her glass of tea in her hands. "Not always, no. She wasn't raised with these attitudes. My grandfather, her father, was actually quite progressive for his time. But after my dad left when I was about 5, something changed in her. She became fearful, suspicious, and over the years it's gotten worse." "That's sad," Anthony said, "and he meant it." "It is," Melissa agreed. "I've tried to help her see how her views hurt people. Hurt her, really, by isolating her from her community. But she's resistant. She sees the changing neighborhood as a threat, not an evolution." "And where do you live?" Zara asked. "Downtown in one of those new mixed-use developments. My partner Luis and I have a loft above his art gallery." She smiled wryly. "Mom has never visited. Says she doesn't feel safe downtown, though the crime rates in her neighborhood and mine are practically identical." They talked for nearly an hour, finding surprising common ground. Melissa was a graphic designer who worked with Anthony's company occasionally. She knew some of the same people Zara had met through her work. By the time she left, with promises to stay in touch, it felt as if they'd made their first real friend in the neighborhood. "Well, that was unexpected," Anthony said as they waved goodbye from the porch. "Life often is," Zara replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Do you think Judith will come around?" Anthony considered the question. "I don't know. People with views like hers don't usually change overnight. But having her behavior exposed like that, in front of the whole neighborhood and her daughter, might give her something to think about." What neither of them knew was that across the street, behind her drawn curtains, Judith was already thinking, not about how to make amends, but about how to assert her authority in the neighborhood once more. The confrontation had humiliated her, and she wasn't a woman who took humiliation lightly. If Anthony and Zara thought this was over, they were sorely mistaken. 2 days after the confrontation, life on Maple Avenue had settled into an uneasy calm. Anthony had returned to work, and Zara was focused on an important presentation for her remote job. The neighborhood gossip mill had moved on to other matters: the Hendersons' new swimming pool, the mysterious moving van outside the old Baker house, and whether the community garden would be expanded this year. Judith Blackwell had not been seen outside her house since Sunday. Her car remained in the driveway, but her curtains stayed drawn, and her porch light remained off at night. Some neighbors speculated that she was simply licking her wounds after the public confrontation, while others wondered if Melissa had finally convinced her mother to rethink her behavior. "Has Melissa texted you at all?" Anthony asked on Tuesday evening as he chopped vegetables for dinner. Zara looked up from her laptop where she was putting the finishing touches on her presentation. "Not since yesterday. She said her mom isn't talking much, just watching old game shows and refusing to discuss what happened." "Can't say I'm surprised," Anthony replied, sliding diced bell peppers into a bowl. "It's probably easier for her to pretend none of it happened." Zara closed her laptop with a sigh. "I almost feel sorry for her. Imagine being so afraid of change that you push away everyone who's different from you. What a lonely way to live." "Your compassion is one of the things I love most about you," Anthony said, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "But don't forget that her actions have real consequences. She tried to get us in trouble with the police. I know, Zara acknowledged. I'm not excusing what she did. I just think it's sad. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Anthony wiped his hands on a dish towel. I'll get it. Can you watch the onions? They're about to go in. He returned a moment later with Rick and Diane, their neighbors from across the street. Diane was clutching a community newsletter in her hand, her expression troubled. Sorry to barge in like this, Rick said as they entered the kitchen, but we thought you should see this right away. Diane handed the newsletter to Zara. It's the draft of the Neighborhood Association's monthly bulletin. Judith submitted it yesterday afternoon. Zara scanned the front page, her expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief as she read a paragraph highlighted in yellow marker. Residents are reminded that Oakwood Heights has always been a family-oriented, residential community. Recent incidents have raised concerns about the increasing number of parties, gatherings, and general disturbances in our once peaceful streets. The board will be reviewing existing noise and nuisance ordinances and considering stricter enforcement measures. Additionally, all residents should be vigilant about reporting any suspicious activities or zoning violations to ensure our neighborhood maintains its character and property values. She doesn't mention us by name, Zara noted, but everyone will know exactly who she's talking about. That's not all, Rick said grimly. Turn to page 3. Zara flipped to the indicated page and found a proposed amendment to the Neighborhood Association bylaws. The amendment would create a new Community Standards Committee with the power to review and potentially fine residents for a wide range of vague infractions, including activities inconsistent with the character of the neighborhood and gatherings exceeding reasonable size and frequency limits. And guess who would chair this committee? Diane asked, her voice tight with indignation. Let me guess. Judith Blackwell? Anthony replied, taking the newsletter from Zara to read it himself. Got it in one, Rick confirmed. She's trying to create her own little enforcement squad. We thought you should know before the association meeting tomorrow night. I can't believe this, Zara said, shaking her head. She's actually trying to institutionalize her prejudice. The thing is, Diane added, lowering her voice slightly, she might have enough support to pull it off. There are a few old-timers on the board who share some of her views, even if they're not as vocal about it. So what do we do? Anthony asked, placing the newsletter on the counter. Come to the meeting, Rick urged. Both of you. Show that you're invested in the community, and maybe prepare to speak about what happened on Sunday. Not everyone knows the full story. After Rick and Diane left, Anthony and Zara sat at their kitchen table, dinner temporarily forgotten as they discussed their options. We could fight this, Anthony said, tapping the newsletter. Get our own neighbors to speak up. Or we could just ignore it, Zara suggested. Take the high road. Maybe if we don't engage, she'll eventually move on to something else. You really think that will work? Anthony asked skeptically. Zara sighed. No, not really. But I hate the thought of turning this into an even bigger neighborhood drama. I've got a major presentation tomorrow at work, and this is the last thing I need to be worrying about. Your presentation. That's for the hospital leadership, right? Yes, the whole executive team will be there. It could mean a big step up for me if they like my ideas for the cardiology department. Anthony reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Then focus on that tonight. I'll go to the meeting tomorrow and represent us both. You can join me if your presentation wraps up in time. The next evening, Zara's presentation ran long, with the hospital executives asking detailed questions about her proposed changes to patient care protocols. By the time she headed home, the neighborhood meeting would already be well underway. She texted Anthony to let him know she was on her way. When Zara arrived at the community center, she slipped quietly into the back of the room. The meeting was larger than she had expected, with at least 50 residents packed into the space. Anthony was near the front, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with an older man in a golf shirt. Judith sat with the association board members at a table facing the crowd, looking simultaneously nervous and triumphant. As Zara made her way toward Anthony, she heard Judith speaking. All I'm proposing is a common-sense approach to maintaining our community standards. Many prestigious neighborhoods have similar committees. And who decides what these standards are? Someone called out. Zara recognized Mr. Washington's deep voice. The committee would be guided by the existing bylaws, of course, Judith replied smoothly. With the board's oversight, "This is nothing but a power grab," Anthony said, his voice carrying across the room. "Ms. Blackwell has made it clear she doesn't approve of certain residents. Now she wants official authority to harass them." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some agreeing, others objecting to Anthony's characterization. "That is a completely unfair accusation," Judith protested. "I have never singled out any specific residents." "You called the police on our housewarming," Anthony countered. "You made false accusations about drug use." "I reported suspected illegal activity as any responsible citizen would," Judith insisted, her voice rising. "If you can't handle living under scrutiny, perhaps you chose the wrong neighborhood." The room erupted into multiple conversations, with residents taking sides and arguing among themselves. Zara stood frozen, watching the community she had hoped to join fracturing before her eyes. Suddenly, a voice cut through the chaos. "Excuse me, but I think I might have relevant experience here." Heads turned toward a woman in her 60s standing near the doorway. Zara didn't recognize her, but several other residents clearly did based on their surprised expressions. "Linda Chen, president of the Westridge Homeowners Association," she introduced herself. "I came tonight because my niece lives in Oakwood Heights and she mentioned this amendment was being discussed." The board chair, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses, nodded politely. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Chen, but this is an internal matter for our association." "I understand," Ms. Chen replied calmly. "I just thought you might benefit from our experience. We tried a similar committee approach 5 years ago. It resulted in 3 lawsuits, 2 discrimination complaints with the Housing Authority, and divided our community for years. I'd be happy to share the legal expenses we incurred." A thoughtful silence fell over the room. The board members exchanged concerned glances. "Perhaps," the chair said cautiously, "we should table this amendment for further legal review." "This is ridiculous," Judith burst out. "We're letting ourselves be intimidated by threats from outsiders." "I'm not an outsider, Judith," Ms. Chen replied evenly. "And it's not a threat, just a friendly warning from someone who's been down this road." The meeting continued with heated discussion, but the momentum had shifted. By the time Zara reached Anthony's side, it was clear that the amendment would at least be delayed, if not abandoned entirely. "You made it," Anthony whispered, squeezing her hand. "How was your presentation?" "It went well, I think," Zara replied, still taking in the scene before her. "What have I missed?" Before Anthony could answer, Judith's voice rose again. "I've lived in this neighborhood for over 30 years, she declared. "I've served on this board, organized events, and always put the community first. Now we're going to let newcomers dictate how we run things." "No one is dictating anything," the board chair said wearily. "We're simply reconsidering an amendment that could have serious legal implications." "And what about the implications of letting just anyone move in?" Judith persisted, her frustration evident. "People who don't share our values, who don't respect our traditions?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Even those who might have privately agreed with Judith seemed uncomfortable with her increasingly explicit bias. Melissa, who had been sitting quietly near her mother, stood up. "Mom, that's enough. You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm standing up for what's right," Judith insisted, her voice shaking slightly. "No, you're standing up for what's familiar," Melissa countered. "Those aren't the same thing." From the back of the room, someone called out, "Dr. Wilson, what do you think about all this?" "You've been pretty quiet." All heads turned toward Zara, standing beside Anthony near the door. She blinked in surprise at being addressed as doctor. "I'm sorry," she said, confused. "Do I know you?" An older man with a trimmed white beard stood up. "You probably don't remember me, but you certainly saved my brother's life last month." "Harold Blackwell?" "Emergency valve replacement surgery?" Zara felt the blood drain from her face as the room suddenly went completely still. Harold Blackwell. She remembered the case vividly. A complex emergency procedure on a patient who'd been rushed to Memorial Hospital after collapsing at his home. She hadn't made the connection until this moment. Every eye in the room shifted from Zara to Judith, whose face had gone pale as chalk. The community center fell into complete silence. You could have heard a pin drop as every person in the room processed what had just been revealed. Judith Blackwell stood frozen behind the table, her face drained of color, her hands gripping the edge as if to steady herself. "Harold Blackwell is your brother?" Anthony asked, breaking the silence as he turned to Judith. She nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes never leaving Zara's face. The man with the white beard continued. Dr. Wilson performed the emergency valve replacement when my brother-in-law collapsed at his birthday dinner. The other doctors said no one else would have attempted such a complex procedure, especially on a patient in his condition. They called it miraculous. Zara shifted uncomfortably under the collective gaze of the room. It was a team effort, she said modestly. And Mr. Blackwell was fortunate that we caught the problem quickly. Fortunate? The man echoed with a short laugh. My wife would say blessed. Harold had been complaining about chest pain for weeks, but he's as stubborn as his sister. Wouldn't go to the doctor until he literally collapsed at the table. By all accounts, he should have died that night. Melissa had moved to her mother's side, one hand on her arm. Mom, she asked quietly, did you know about this? Judith shook her head slowly, still staring at Zara as if seeing her for the first time. I knew a female doctor performed the surgery. Harold mentioned her a few times during his recovery. Said she had skilled hands. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I never made the connection. The board chair cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the personal drama unfolding during an official meeting. Perhaps we should take a short break. No, Judith interrupted, her voice stronger now. No, I need to. I should. She trailed off, then abruptly gathered her papers and hurried from the room without finishing her thought. The meeting dissolved into buzzing conversation as Judith pushed through the door. Melissa hesitated, torn between following her mother and staying to address the community. I'm sorry, she said finally, addressing the room at large. Please continue the meeting without us. After Melissa left, the board chair attempted to restore order, but the energy of the meeting had completely changed. The controversial amendment was tabled indefinitely, and the remaining agenda items were rushed through with minimal discussion. No one seemed interested in neighborhood bylaws anymore. They were too busy processing what they had witnessed. As people began filing out, many stopped to speak with Zara. Some were previous patients or family members of patients. Others simply wanted to express their appreciation for her work at Memorial Hospital. Anthony stood beside her, his expression a mix of pride and amusement, as he watched his wife unexpectedly become the center of positive attention. You never told me. You were such a big deal. He teased quietly as they walked to their car. I'm not, Zara protested. I'm just doing my job. A job that saves lives, he reminded her gently, including the life of Judith Blackwell's brother, apparently. Zara was quiet on the drive home, processing the evening's events. Do you think this will change anything? She finally asked as they pulled into their driveway. Anthony sighed, turning off the engine. I don't know. It should if Judith has any decency at all. But people with deep-seated prejudices don't usually have overnight conversions, even when faced with evidence that contradicts their beliefs. I guess we'll find out soon enough, Zara said, glancing toward house number 47, where all the lights were off except for a dim glow from what she assumed was Judith's bedroom. The next morning brought no sign of Judith. Her car remained in the driveway, but her house stayed silent and shuttered. Zara left for work early, her mind already turning to her patients and the busy day ahead. Anthony worked from home, occasionally glancing out the window toward Judith's house, but saw no movement. 2 more days passed in similar fashion. Life on Maple Avenue resumed its normal rhythm. Neighbors chatted by mailboxes and children played on front lawns. The confrontation at the community center became the primary topic of gossip, with various versions of the story spreading throughout Oakwood Heights. On Friday evening, as Zara and Anthony were enjoying dinner on their patio, Melissa's silver car pulled into Judith's driveway. A few minutes later, she crossed the street and approached their yard. Mind if I join you for a minute? She asked, hovering at the edge of their property. Of course not, Zara replied warmly, gesturing to an empty chair. Would you like some iced tea? No, thank you. I can't stay long. Melissa sat down, her expression troubled. I wanted to talk to you about my mother. How is she? Anthony asked, his tone neutral. Struggling, Melissa admitted. She hasn't left the house since the meeting. Barely eats, just sits in her chair watching old TV shows or staring out the window. She turned to Zara. The thing is, she wants to apologize to you, but she doesn't know how. I think she's afraid. Afraid of what? Zara asked gently. Of facing what this reveals about her, about the kind of person she's become. Melissa's voice cracked slightly. My mother wasn't always like this, you know. When I was very young, she was different, warm, open-minded, curious about the world. My father's leaving changed her. She built walls, created rules, tried to control everything around her because she couldn't control what had hurt her most. Anthony's expression softened. That doesn't excuse her behavior. No, it doesn't, Melissa agreed. And I've told her that. But I also think she deserves a chance to make amends if she's willing to try. Zara considered this. What are you suggesting? Would you be willing to come over? Just for a few minutes? I think if she could speak with you directly without an audience, it might be easier for her to find the right words. Zara and Anthony exchanged a look, having a silent conversation with their eyes. Finally, Zara nodded. I can do that. When would be a good time? Now, if that's okay? I told her I was coming to speak with you. She's expecting me back. Zara took a deep breath. All right. Let me just clear these dishes. I'll take care of it, Anthony said, squeezing her hand. Do you want me to come with you? She thought about it for a moment. No, I think this might be better one-on-one. But thank you. The walk across the street felt longer than it should have. Zara followed Melissa up the neat brick path to Judith's front door. The house was immaculately maintained from the outside. Fresh paint, carefully trimmed hedges, not a weed in sight, but had a strangely unlived-in quality, as if it were more of a display than a home. Inside was a different story. The living room was cluttered with decades of collected objects, figurines, framed photos, embroidered pillows, and stacks of magazines. It was clean but crowded, like a museum dedicated to one person's life. Judith sat in a wingback chair near the window, where she would have had a clear view of the Wilsons' house. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, as if the past week had physically shrunk her. She wore a neatly pressed blouse and slacks, her hair carefully styled, but her face was drawn and tired. Mom, Melissa said gently, Dr. Wilson is here to see you. Judith looked up, her eyes meeting Zara's for a brief moment before dropping to her hands, which were twisted together in her lap. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice barely audible. Melissa gestured for Zara to take a seat on the sofa, then discreetly slipped out of the room, leaving the two women alone. For a long moment, neither spoke. Zara waited patiently, letting Judith gather her thoughts. My brother showed me a photo, Judith finally said, of the medical team that saved his life. You were in it, but I never really looked at the faces. I just heard him say Dr. Wilson and assumed. She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. You assumed I was someone else? Zara supplied gently. Someone who looked different from me. Judith nodded, the simple gesture containing a world of uncomfortable acknowledgement. Harold talks about you all the time. Your skill, your kindness, how you visited him every day during his recovery. Explained everything so clearly. He said you even made him laugh when he was frightened. He was a good patient, Zara said, determined to get better. He's the only family I have left besides Melissa. Judith's voice cracked slightly. If you hadn't been there that night. But I was, Zara said simply. That's how life works sometimes. People come into our lives when we need them, often in ways we don't expect. Judith finally looked up, meeting Zara's gaze directly. I've behaved terribly toward you and your husband. There's no excuse for it. I could try to explain about feeling displaced in my own neighborhood, about fearing change, about getting older and seeing everything familiar slip away. But those aren't excuses. They're just sad justifications for becoming someone I don't particularly like. The raw honesty of her words caught Zara by surprise. She had expected defensiveness, perhaps a grudging, formal apology, not this vulnerable self-assessment. Thank you for saying that, Zara said. It takes courage to look at yourself that honestly. Not courage, Judith corrected her. Necessity. Finding out that the person I've been treating so shamefully is the same person who saved my brother's life. It forced me to see what I've become, and I don't like it. A tear slipped down her cheek, which she quickly wiped away. I don't expect you to forgive me, or even to believe that I can change. At my age, people don't change easily. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry, and I won't be bothering you anymore. Zara was quiet for a moment, considering her response. I believe people can change at any age, Ms. Blackwell. It's never too late to open your heart a little wider. And as for forgiveness, yes, I forgive you. But trust is something different. That will take time to rebuild. Judith nodded, accepting this. That's more than fair. As Zara rose to leave, she paused. You know, we still haven't properly met. I'm Zara Wilson. She extended her hand. Judith stood slowly and took the offered hand. Judith Blackwell. It's nice to meet you, Dr. Wilson. Please call me Zara. And maybe sometime when you're feeling up to it, you could join us for dinner. Nothing fancy, just neighbors getting to know each other. A tentative smile touched Judith's lips. I'd like that. In the weeks that followed, Oakwood Heights watched with curiosity as small changes unfolded on Maple Avenue. Judith withdrew her proposed amendment and resigned from the Neighborhood Association Board. She began taking her morning coffee on the front porch rather than behind drawn curtains. And occasionally she could be seen chatting briefly with Anthony as they both collected their mail, or exchanging plants with Zara for their respective gardens. The change wasn't dramatic or instant. There were still moments of awkwardness, brief flashes of the old prejudices surfacing in Judith's expression or tone, but each time she seemed to catch herself, to consciously choose a different path. 6 months after the revelation at the community center, Oakwood Heights held its annual summer block party. To everyone's surprise, Judith not only attended but brought her brother Harold, now fully recovered from his surgery. He made a beeline for Zara, enveloping her in a bear hug and loudly telling anyone who would listen how she had saved his life. As evening fell and neighbors gathered on lawn chairs to watch the children chase fireflies, Melissa found Zara and Anthony sharing a quiet moment on their porch steps. I never thought I'd see my mother at a block party again, she said, nodding toward Judith, who was deep in conversation with Mr. Washington and the Patels. Let alone enjoying herself. People can surprise you, Anthony replied, his arm around Zara's shoulders. That they can, Zara agreed, watching as Judith laughed at something Mr. Washington said, a genuine laugh that reached her eyes and softened the lines of her face. Sometimes all they need is a reason to see things differently.